The air in the forward base reeked of disinfectant, sweat, and something else, the unmistakable metallic tang of fear. Sergeant Kalen Vance removed his helmet, letting the recycled air of the underground bunker fill his lungs. He'd been fighting in this godforsaken war against the Signians for too long now. 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days, to be exact. Not that he was counting. Sergeant Vance. The sharp voice of Lieutenant Mercer cut through the ambient noise of the command center. Command wants you to handle the prisoner in cell block D. Kalen's face remained impassive, though his stomach tightened. Handle, in military parlance, rarely meant anything good for the prisoner. The Signian scout captured near the western perimeter? Affirmative. High-value target, according to intelligence. Could be hiding important information. Mercer's eyes narrowed. Make it quick and clean. We don't need any complications. The unspoken order hung in the air between them. Dispose of the threat. Kalen had followed such orders before. This was war, after all. But something about the lieutenant's eager expression made his skin crawl. Yes, sir. Kalen snapped a salute and turned away, his boots echoing on the metal flooring as he made his way toward the detention area. Cell Block D was isolated from the main prison area, reserved for high-profile captives. The guard on duty nodded at Kalen, keying in the access code without question. The sergeant's reputation preceded him. Efficient, thorough, unquestioning. The perfect soldier. At least, that's what his commanding officers believed. The cell door hissed open, and Kalen stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, damp with condensation that seemed to be a permanent feature of the old bunker. In the corner, a figure stirred. She was beautiful, in an alien way. Her skin was a luminescent aquamarine that seemed to shimmer even in the poor lighting, like the surface of a tropical ocean under moonlight. Her eyes, silver, reflective, with no discernible pupil, fixed on him with a mixture of defiance and terror. Despite her obvious exhaustion and the crude restraints binding her wrists, there was an undeniable dignity to her posture. They send you to kill me, human? Her voice was melodic, with an accent that turned her words into something almost musical, despite the gravity of her question. Kalen said nothing, studying her. Propaganda had painted the Signians as savage, bloodthirsty warriors, monsters with no concept of mercy or honor. The woman before him seemed far from that caricature. Her slim frame showed signs of mistreatment. Bruises blossomed on her exposed arms, and a thin trickle of indigo blood had dried at the corner of her mouth. I am Lyra, she said suddenly, as if making a decision. 16th daughter of the celestial house of Andromeda. Her chin lifted slightly. If I am to die, I would have my executioner know my name. Kalen's hand drifted to his sidearm, but he didn't draw it. 3 years of fighting, of watching comrades fall to Signian weapons, should have made this easy. A simple pull of the trigger, a report to file, and another enemy of the Terran Alliance eliminated. So why was he hesitating? The Signian, Lyra, must have sensed his indecision. She leaned forward, her restraints clanking against the metal bench. Show mercy, human, she whispered, her silver eyes wide and desperate. My body will give you powerful offspring. Kalen recoiled, shocked by the unexpected plea. What did you say? It is the only hope, Lyra continued urgently. The last duty I can perform. Please, her voice broke. If there is any compassion in your species, grant me this. Something about her desperation felt genuine, raw in a way that couldn't be fabricated. Kalen found himself thinking of his younger sister, killed in one of the first Signian attacks on the colony world of New Eden. Or so he'd been told. In truth, he'd never seen proof, just received the notification along with millions of others when the war propaganda machine was revving up. How many of the atrocities attributed to the Signians were real? How many were the fabrications of leaders who needed enemies to maintain power? The security camera in the corner of the cell blinked its red eye at him. He was being watched, evaluated. His decision in this moment would determine not only Lyra's fate, but his own as well. Stand up, he ordered, his voice harsh. For the benefit of anyone watching, he added, we're going to processing. Command wants additional interrogation. Understanding flickered in Lyra's eyes, but she said nothing as Kalen roughly pulled her to her feet. He shoved her toward the door, perhaps harder than necessary, and barked an order at the guard about taking the prisoner for further questioning. As they moved through the dimly lit corridor, Kalen subtly guided them toward the service tunnels that ran beneath the main compound. He'd memorized the patrol schedules, knew that this section would be deserted for the next 20 minutes during shift change. At the junction that led toward the intelligence wing, Kalen suddenly pulled Lyra into a maintenance alcove. With quick, efficient movements, he disabled the tracking device on her restraints and unlocked them. "Listen carefully," he whispered, pressing a small device into her palm. "This is a locator beacon and access key. Follow the service tunnel to the end, then take the right fork. It leads to an old emergency exit that was decommissioned last year. The key will get you through the final door." He paused, searching her alien features. "I'm risking everything on this. Don't make me regret it." Lyra stared at him, confusion and hope warring in her expression. "Why would you help me?" A distant alarm began to wail, perhaps unrelated, perhaps not. They had no time. "Maybe I'm tired of this war," Kalen muttered. "Go. Now. I'll create a diversion." After a moment's hesitation, Lyra reached out, her cool fingers brushing against his wrist in what he recognized as a gesture of gratitude. Then she was gone, slipping like a shadow into the service tunnel. Kalen had just enough time to stage his scene. Overturned equipment, signs of a struggle, a minor head wound self-inflicted against the wall before security forces arrived, responding to his emergency beacon. "The prisoner," he gasped, playing the part of the dedicated soldier. "She escaped, heading toward the east quadrant." As the security team rushed off in the wrong direction, Kalen allowed himself a moment of doubt. Had he just committed treason for an alien who might be manipulating him? Or had he finally done something right in this endless, senseless war? Either way, it was too late to turn back now. The bitter winds of Xylos cut through Kalen's thermal gear as he crouched behind a twisted piece of wreckage, the remains of a Terran fighter that had crashed months ago. In the 3 days since Lyra's escape, he'd managed to maintain his cover, even joining the search parties dispatched to recapture her. Now, under cover of darkness, he'd slipped away to the coordinates encoded in the locator beacon he'd given her. If she'd understood his instructions, if she hadn't been recaptured or killed, she would be here. Movement in the shadows caused him to raise his pulse rifle instinctively. Then a familiar aquamarine figure emerged from behind a rock formation, silver eyes catching the faint moonlight. "You came," Lyra said, her voice a mixture of surprise and relief. "I can't go back," Kalen replied grimly. "They're reviewing the security feeds. It's only a matter of time before they realize I helped you escape." Lyra nodded, accepting this without question. "Then we must move quickly. The patrol patterns suggest they are concentrating their search to the south." Kalen raised an eyebrow. "You've been tracking our patrol patterns?" "I was not captured by accident, human." A hint of pride colored her voice. "I was scouting your defenses." This revelation should have angered him, should have confirmed every propaganda statement about the duplicitous nature of the Signians. Instead, Kalen found himself respecting her resourcefulness. "We need to get off this plateau," he said, scanning the horizon. "There's a forested valley about 10 clicks north. Better cover, potential water source." "The crystal forest." Lyra's tone changed, became wary. "It is dangerous at night. The bioluminescent flora attracts predators." Kalen adjusted his pack. "It's our best option, unless you have a better suggestion." After a moment's consideration, Lyra nodded. "I know a path that skirts the worst of the hunting grounds. Follow me." As they began their trek across the desolate landscape, Kalen maintained a vigilant watch, alert for signs of pursuit from either Terran forces or hostile wildlife. The silence between them was tense, laden with unspoken questions and lingering distrust. Finally, as they descended into a wind-carved canyon that offered temporary shelter, Kalen voiced the question that had been bothering him since the cell. "What did you mean?" "About Offspring." Lyra didn't immediately answer. She found a relatively flat rock and sat, her movements graceful despite her obvious fatigue. "It is complicated," she finally said, and not something easily explained to an enemy. I think we're past traditional enemy classifications, Kalen replied dryly, gesturing to their current situation. A ghost of a smile touched Lyra's lips. Perhaps. She looked up at the stars, visible in patches through the cloud cover. What do you know of Sigmian biology, human? Military briefs only. Your species is humanoid, silver-blooded, with enhanced sensory capabilities and potential telepathic abilities among the elite castes. He paused, and apparently, you can interbreed with humans, which was never in any briefing I received. Theoretically, Lyra corrected. It has been speculated upon by our scientists. Never attempted, as far as I know. She hesitated. It was an act of desperation, my offer. A final duty to my lineage. Before Kalen could press further, a distant sound caught his attention. The unmistakable whine of Terran hover engines. Search party, he hissed, dousing the small heat source he'd activated. They're using thermal scanners. We need to move. Lyra was on her feet instantly, all traces of fatigue vanishing in the face of danger. This way, she whispered, leading him toward a narrow fissure in the canyon wall. The mineral content of these rocks interferes with scanning technology. They squeezed through the opening just as the searchlights began sweeping the canyon floor. Pressed together in the tight space, Kalen could feel Lyra's heart racing. Faster than a human's, a rapid flutter like a trapped bird. They're being thorough, he murmured, watching the methodical search pattern. This isn't a standard recovery mission. Someone wants you badly. Not just me, Lyra replied softly. They will want you too now. Traitor is worse than enemy in their eyes, yes. Kalen couldn't argue with that assessment. The punishment for aiding an enemy combatant was clear, immediate execution, no trial. He'd known the risks when he made his choice. The search party moved closer, and Kalen instinctively drew Lyra deeper into the shadows. She didn't resist, her body tensing as the lights passed near their hiding spot. Hold position, a familiar voice ordered outside. I'm picking up residual heat signatures. Lieutenant Mercer. Kalen's jaw tightened. Of all the officers who could have led the search, Mercer was the worst, ruthless, ambitious, with a personal dislike of Kalen that stemmed from an earlier disagreement over the treatment of civilian refugees. If they find us, Kalen whispered, run. Don't look back. Lyra's silver eyes found his in the darkness. We survive together or not at all, she replied firmly. I will not abandon the one who showed me mercy. The searchlights lingered near their position, and Kalen reached for his sidearm, calculating their chances in a direct confrontation. Poor at best. For soldiers plus Mercer, all armed with standard-issue pulse rifles, versus his handgun and whatever combat skills Lyra possessed. Just as capture seemed inevitable, a howl echoed through the canyon. The distinctive cry of a Xylosian sand wolf, dangerously close. The searchlights immediately swung toward the sound. Predator movement, northwest quadrant, one of the soldiers reported. Pack hunting behavior, another added nervously. Suggest immediate withdrawal to higher ground. Mercer hesitated, clearly torn between his mission and the safety of his team. A second howl, closer this time, made the decision for him. Fall back to the transport, he ordered. We'll resume the search at dawn. As the Terran soldiers retreated, Kalen released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Beside him, Lyra's expression was unreadable. The wolves saved us, he remarked quietly. Not wolves, Lyra corrected. Something similar, but not the same. Your people named them incorrectly, as you do with many things on this world. There was something in her tone, a hint of deeper knowledge that piqued Kalen's curiosity. But now wasn't the time for zoological discussions. We should move while we have the chance, he said. Put as much distance between us and their search grid as possible. Lyra nodded in agreement, and they emerged from their hiding place, continuing their journey through the alien landscape, each step taking them further from the lives they had known and deeper into uncertainty. By dawn, they had traversed the canyon and entered the outskirts of what Terran maps designated as the Crystal Forest, a misleading name for the bioluminescent ecosystem that sprawled across the valley floor. The trees were actually massive fungal structures, their translucent stalks housing complex colonies of light-producing microorganisms. During the day, they appeared merely strange. At night, they transformed the forest into an otherworldly spectacle of blues and purples that could be seen from orbit. Kalen scanned their surroundings with practiced efficiency, identifying potential shelter options. We need a rest. Neither of us has slept in over 24 hours. Lyra pointed toward a cluster of rock formations jutting up through the fungal growth. There, natural caves often form in those structures. Defensible position, clear sight lines. They made their way toward the rocks, alert for signs of the predators that had inadvertently aided their escape earlier. The cave they found was shallow but dry, with a narrow entrance that could be easily monitored. As Kalen set up basic perimeter alerts, rudimentary tripwires with attached noisemakers, Lyra gathered some of the bioluminescent fungi, arranging them to provide subtle illumination. Clever, Kalen commented, though I'm surprised you're willing to use the light. Thought you'd be more concerned about attracting attention. These particular specimens emit frequencies outside the visual range of most Xylosian predators, Lyra explained. And your military scanners aren't calibrated to detect them either. Her confident knowledge of both alien biology and Terran military capabilities was another reminder that she was no ordinary prisoner. Kalen studied her as she worked, noting the deliberate precision of her movements, trained, methodical, similar to his own military conditioning. You're not just a scout, he said finally. Who are you really? Lyra of the Celestial House of Andromeda. Lyra finished arranging her makeshift lights before answering. Would you believe me if I told you I was a scientist? She asked, settling cross-legged on the cave floor. A xenobiologist specifically, studying us. Kalen remained standing, unconsciously maintaining tactical advantage. Studying Xylos, she corrected. This world is unique, a biological treasure trove. The war is destroying ecosystems that have existed in perfect balance for millions of years. She gestured toward the forest outside. Those fungal colonies communicate through chemical signals. They share nutrients, warn each other of dangers. They are in their way a single vast organism. Pretty poetic for someone who was supposedly scouting our defenses. A shadow passed over Lyra's features. One could be many things in war, Sergeant Vance. Scientist, scout, survivor. She looked up at him. Just as you could be soldier, guard, and rescuer. Kalen couldn't argue with that. He played many roles since the war began, some that still haunted his dreams. You should rest, he said, changing the subject. I'll take first watch. I require less sleep than humans, Lyra replied. My species evolved on a world with a 30-hour rotation cycle. Even so, you've been through a lot. Kalen finally sat down, though he positioned himself near the cave entrance, his weapon within easy reach. I need you at full capacity if we're going to survive this. Lyra studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Wake me in 4 hours, then. We should not remain in one place too long. As she settled into a meditative position that looked uncomfortable to Kalen's human eyes, he found himself wondering about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. Enemy combatants from opposite sides of an interstellar conflict, now dependent on each other for survival. Why did you help me? Lyra asked suddenly, her silver eyes gleaming in the ethereal light of the fungi. The truth, please, not just war fatigue. Kalen considered deflecting the question, giving her the simple answer. But something in her direct gaze compelled honesty. I lost my sister in the early days of the war, he said quietly. Settlement on New Eden. The official report said it was a Cygnian attack. Unprovoked, merciless. For years, I've fought with her memory driving me, seeking some kind of justice or, I don't know, meaning in her death. He paused, organizing thoughts he'd never fully articulated even to himself. Then last year, I was part of a team that raided a Cygnian outpost. We found intelligence files, records of their military operations during that period. I was hoping to find something about the New Eden attack, some confirmation that would, I don't know, justify everything I'd done in this war. And did you find this confirmation? Lyra's voice was soft, without judgment. No. According to their records, there were no Signian forces anywhere near New Eden when the attack happened. Kalen's jaw tightened. I reported it to command. The files mysteriously disappeared. I was told the information was clearly falsified, propaganda designed to demoralize our forces. You did not believe this explanation. It planted a seed of doubt, and doubt is dangerous for a soldier. He met her gaze directly. When I saw you in that cell, when I heard Lieutenant Mercer's tone, I realized I couldn't follow those orders anymore. Not without knowing the truth. Lyra was silent for a long moment. Then, with an air of decision, she reached into a hidden pocket in her garment and withdrew a small crystalline device no larger than her thumb. This contains data that could end the war, she said, holding it out to him. It is why I was on a scouting mission despite my scientific background. Why I allowed myself to be captured. Kalen didn't take the device. What kind of data? Evidence of a third party manipulating both our species. Her expression was grave. The attack on New Eden? It was not Signian forces. But neither was it an accident or natural disaster as your leaders may have claimed. The implications staggered him. Who then? We know them as the Shadowed Ones. Your people might have encountered them under different names. She turned the crystal in her fingers, its facets catching the bioluminescent light. They thrive on conflict, manipulating developing civilizations into war. Some believe they feed on the negative emotional energy somehow. Under normal circumstances, Kalen might have dismissed such claims as desperate fabrications. But after years of growing doubts, of pieces that didn't fit the official narrative, Lyra's explanation resonated with a ring of truth. This evidence, he said carefully, you were trying to bring it to someone specific? Lyra nodded. There is a faction within your Terran alliance, military leaders, scientists, diplomats who suspect the truth, just as there are those among my people working toward peace. She hesitated. The data must reach Admiral Helena Corey. She commands the Terran peacekeeping fleet in the Procyon sector, but maintains a hidden base on Xylos. The name sent a jolt through Kalen. Admiral Corey was something of a legend, a decorated officer known for her unconventional strategies and strict ethical code. There had been rumors of her falling out of favor with high command recently, supposedly over tactical disagreements. If what you're saying is true, Kalen said slowly, then helping you isn't just about saving one life. It's about potentially saving millions. Yes. Lyra's silver eyes held his. Now perhaps you understand my desperation in the cell. The information I carry must survive, even if I do not. The genetic compatibility between our species, theoretical though it may be, offered a path for the knowledge to continue, encoded in offspring that might one day understand their heritage and the truth. The enormity of her revelation left Kalen momentarily speechless. His decision to help her, made in a moment of moral crisis, now seemed like a pivotal turning point in a much larger story. Get some rest, he finally said. Tomorrow, we find a way to contact Admiral Corey. As Lyra closed her eyes, Kalen turned his gaze to the cave entrance, where the first light of the alien dawn filtered through the strange forest. He had begun this journey as a deserter, a traitor to his command. Now, he found himself potentially a savior, not just of one alien scientist, but perhaps of two civilizations locked in a manufactured conflict. If, of course, they survived long enough to deliver their message. The smell of scorched earth and burned fungal matter filled Kalen's nostrils as he crouched behind a fallen bioluminescent trunk. Beside him, Lyra watched the Terran patrol with unervingly steady silver eyes. They're using pulse scanners, Kalen whispered. Standard search grid pattern. They haven't spotted us yet. 5 days had passed since their escape from the Terran base. 5 days of constant movement, of forging a fragile trust through shared danger and gradual revelations. They had been making progress toward the coordinates Lyra believed would lead them to Admiral Corey's hidden base when they encountered the first signs of heavy military activity, both Terran and Signian forces converging on the region. This makes no sense, Kalen had muttered as they observed a Terran armored transport rumbling through the forest, leaving destruction in its wake. This sector was designated as ecologically protected. No military operations authorized. The data crystal, Lyra had suggested. They must know I carry it. Both sides have infiltrators, those working for the Shadowed Ones. Now, as they watched another patrol sweep through the devastated forest, Kalen fought down a growing sense of futility. They were two individuals against the combined might of two military forces, possibly backed by a mysterious third party with technologies they didn't fully understand. We should move southeast, Lyra said quietly. There's a network of caves that leads toward the mountains. We could. She stopped abruptly, her head tilting in an almost bird-like gesture of alertness. A moment later, Kalen heard it too, the distinctive whine of Cygnian hoverbikes, approaching rapidly from the north. Trap, he hissed. They're driving us toward the caves. Classic pincer movement. Lyra's expression remained calm, though Kalen had learned to read the subtle tensions in her alien features. The underground river, she said. If we can reach it, the mineral content will mask our biological signatures. It was a desperate plan, but they had few options. As the Terran patrol moved toward the western perimeter, Kalen and Lyra used the momentary opening to slip deeper into the forest, moving silently through the undergrowth with the practiced ease of seasoned survivors. They had nearly reached the riverbank when a voice called out from behind them. That's far enough, traitor. Kalen turned slowly, instinctively positioning himself between Lyra and the threat. Lieutenant Mercer stood 20 meters away, his pulse rifle aimed squarely at Kalen's chest. Two soldiers flanked him there, weapons similarly trained. Lieutenant, Kalen acknowledged, his mind racing through tactical options, finding few viable ones. I always knew you were soft, Vance, Mercer said, a sneer distorting his features. Too many questions, too much hesitation. But helping an enemy combatant escape? That's a new low, even for you. The war is based on lies, Kalen replied evenly. You've seen the evidence yourself, the inconsistencies in the reports, the convenient disappearance of contradictory information. What I see is a soldier who's betrayed his oath, his species, and his comrades. Mercer took a step forward. Hand over the Cygnian, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you face a proper court-martial instead of executing you right here. Before Kalen could respond, movement from the east caught his attention. A Cygnian patrol emerging from the tree line, their iridescent armor gleaming in the filtered sunlight. Humans, the lead Cygnian called out, his voice amplified by his helmet. Surrender the female scientist, and you may leave with your lives. The standoff was as precarious as it was unexpected. Terran forces to the west, Cygnians to the east, and the underground river to the south, their only potential escape route. Interesting timing, Mercer commented, his rifle unwavering. Almost like this meeting was coordinated. The Cygnian commander tilted his head in acknowledgement. We share a common interest in this matter, human. The scientist has information dangerous to both our species. Kalen felt Lyra tense beside him. The Shadowed Ones, she whispered. Both commanders are compromised. The revelation sent a chill through Kalen. If true, it confirmed everything Lyra had told him about the manipulation of both sides in this conflict. What information? He called out, playing for time as he subtly maneuvered closer to the riverbank. What are you so afraid she'll reveal? Don't play games, Vance, Mercer snapped. The data crystal she's carrying. Hand it over now. The genetic research data is a Cygnian property, the alien commander countered. It belongs with us. Genetic research. Kalen glanced at Lyra, whose face remained carefully neutral. She had told him the crystal contained evidence of third-party manipulation, political information, not scientific. What wasn't she telling him? Last chance, Sergeant, Mercer warned, his finger tightening on the trigger. In that moment, Kalen made his decision. With a subtle nod to Lyra, he raised his hands in apparent surrender. All right, he said loudly. No need for bloodshed. The crystal's right here. As Mercer and the Cygnian commander both took steps forward, Kalen reached slowly into his pocket, then suddenly threw a flashbang grenade directly between the two groups. In a moment of confusion that followed the blinding explosion, he grabbed Lyra's hand and plunged toward the riverbank. Pulse fire erupted behind them, energy bolts scorching the earth where they had stood moments before. They crashed through the underbrush and slid down the steep embankment toward the rushing water below. "Hold your breath," Kalen shouted as they plummeted into the icy current of the underground river, the waters closing over their heads just as the pursuing forces reached the top of the ravine. The cold was shocking, the current stronger than Kalen had anticipated. He maintained his grip on Lyra's hand as the river pulled them into a tunnel, darkness enveloping them completely. For terrifying moments, he fought against the primal panic of being underwater in absolute blackness, unsure which way led to air. Then Lyra was pulling him upward, her natural night vision guiding them to a pocket of air within the tunnel system. They surfaced, gasping, the sound echoing in the confined space. "Are you all right?" Kalen managed between breaths, unable to see Lyra in the perfect darkness. "Yes," came her reply, her voice steady despite their narrow escape. "The current has carried us approximately half a kilometer downstream. We should be safe from immediate pursuit." As their breathing steadied, Kalen became aware of a faint glow emanating from Lyra herself, a subtle bioluminescence that cast just enough light to make out their immediate surroundings. "Useful trick," he commented, trying to assess their situation. They were in a natural air pocket within the tunnel system, water flowing swiftly beneath them. "A defense mechanism," Lyra explained, "activated by stress or danger." She hesitated. "Kalen, about what they said, the genetic research. You told me the crystal contained evidence of manipulation," he said, unable to keep a note of accusation from his voice. "Political information, not scientific." Lyra's glow intensified slightly, whether from increased stress or deliberate effort. Kalen couldn't tell. "It contains both," she admitted. "The evidence of the Shadowed One's influence is intertwined with biological data, specifically research on the genetic compatibility between our species. So your offer in the cell about Offspring, that wasn't just desperation talking?" "No." Lyra moved closer in the confined space, her silver eyes reflecting her own bioluminescence. "My research team discovered something extraordinary. Our species share a common ancestor, seeded across different worlds by an ancient civilization long extinct. The genetic divergence is significant, but not insurmountable. And this relates to the war. How? Exactly? The Shadowed One's fear hybrid offspring," Lyra explained. "Our research suggests that children born of human and Cygnian parentage would possess unique neurological structures, immune to the psychic influence the Shadowed Ones use to manipulate our leaders and sow conflict." The implications were staggering. So they orchestrated an entire interstellar war to prevent this knowledge from spreading? To keep our species apart? "Yes." Lyra's voice was solemn. "They have done this before to other species pairs throughout the galaxy. When two compatible species reach a level of technology that would allow them to meet and potentially interbreed, the Shadowed Ones intervene, ensuring first contact becomes first conflict." Kalen was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. It explained so much: the convenient escalations at moments when peace seemed possible, the irrational decisions by otherwise rational leaders, the disappearance of evidence that contradicted the official narratives of the war. "We need to get this information to Admiral Corey," he said finally. "The underwater current leads in the general direction of her base," Lyra replied. "But we cannot stay in this water much longer. Your body temperature is already dropping dangerously." She was right. Kalen could feel the cold seeping into his bones, his movements becoming sluggish. Human physiology wasn't designed for prolonged immersion in icy water. "There should be exit points further downstream," Lyra continued, her glow illuminating the tunnel ahead. "Places where the river surfaces briefly before continuing underground. We must find one before hypothermia sets in." With renewed urgency, they let the current carry them forward, Lyra's bioluminescence lighting their way through the twisting tunnels. Kalen fought to remain alert, focusing on the mission, on the vital importance of the information they carried. If what Lyra said was true, they held the key not just to ending the current conflict, but to preventing countless future wars across the galaxy. The water was becoming his enemy now, each minute of immersion draining more of his strength and warmth. Lyra seemed less affected, her alien physiology better adapted to temperature extremes. "There," she said suddenly, pointing ahead. "I can see moonlight." Sure enough, a faint silvery glow marked the end of their underground journey. With the last of his strength, Kalen swam toward it, Lyra helping to support him as they emerged into a small grotto open to the night sky. They dragged themselves onto a narrow strip of rocky beach, Kalen collapsing in exhaustion as soon as they were clear of the water. Lyra immediately set about checking his condition, her movements precise and clinical. "Your core temperature is dangerously low," she said, concern evident in her voice. "We need to get you warm." Through chattering teeth, Kalen managed to ask, "Any sign of pursuit?" "Not yet, but they will have predicted our route." Lyra scanned their surroundings. "This grotto appears to be within a larger cave system. If we move deeper, we may find a defensible position where you can recover." With Lyra's help, Kalen staggered to his feet, leaning heavily on her as they made their way deeper into the cave. The further they went, the stranger their surroundings became. The natural rock formations gave way to carved passages, clearly artificial and ancient. "What is this place?" Kalen asked, his voice echoing in the strange corridor. "I am not certain," Lyra replied, her bioluminescence illuminating symbols etched into the walls. "These markings are similar to ruins found on several worlds in both Terran and Signian space. They may be remnants of the ancient civilization I mentioned, those who seeded our genetic material across the stars." As they moved deeper into the mysterious structure, the temperature gradually rose, bringing blessed warmth to Kalen's frozen limbs. The passageway eventually opened into a vast chamber, where the source of heat became apparent. A pool of geothermally warmed water steamed gently in the center of the room. "We should rest here," Lyra decided, guiding Kalen to a relatively flat area near the pool. "The warm air will help raise your body temperature, and the rock formations will shield us from scanners." Too exhausted to argue, Kalen sank down against the wall, his wet clothing clinging uncomfortably to his skin. Lyra busied herself examining their surroundings, her natural glow revealing intricate murals that covered the chamber walls. "These are remarkable," she murmured, tracing her fingers over a series of images that seemed to depict humanoid figures of various forms living in harmony. "This confirms my theory. The Ancient Ones didn't just seed worlds with compatible life forms. They actively encouraged cross-species cooperation and bonding." Kalen managed a weak laugh. "Not very successful in our case, were they?" "Their influence faded over millennia," Lyra replied, returning to his side and kneeling to check his condition. "And then the Shadowed Ones came, turning cooperation into conflict wherever they found it." She frowned, touching his forehead. "Your temperature is still too low. You need to remove these wet garments." Despite the dire circumstances, Kalen felt an absurd moment of self-consciousness. "I'll be fine. Just need to rest a bit." Lyra fixed him with a stern look that transcended species differences. "This is not the time for human modesty, Sergeant Vance. Hypothermia can kill you, and your death would mean the failure of our mission." Put that way, it was hard to argue. With stiff fingers, Kalen began removing his sodden uniform. Lyra helped without embarrassment or hesitation, her actions purely practical. When he was down to his undergarments, she spread his clothing on nearby rocks to dry in the geothermal heat. "You should immerse yourself in the pool," she suggested. "The water is warm, but not too hot. It will help restore your core temperature more effectively than air alone." Kalen eyed the steaming pool warily. "Are you sure it's safe? No alien microbes or caustic minerals?" "I tested it while you were removing your clothing," Lyra replied with a hint of amusement. "It is similar in composition to the hot springs found on both our worlds. Mineral-rich, but nothing harmful to human physiology." Too tired to resist further, Kalen eased himself into the pool, sighing as the blessed warmth enveloped his chilled body. The water was silky with dissolved minerals, and he could feel his muscles beginning to unlock from their cold-induced rigidity. After a moment's hesitation, Lyra joined him, slipping gracefully into the water. Her bioluminescence dimmed slightly as she relaxed, casting a gentle glow across the surface. "Better?" she asked, staying a respectful distance away. "Much," Kalen admitted. "Thank you. For everything. I'd be dead several times over without you." "We have kept each other alive," Lyra corrected, "as it should be between our species." They fell into companionable silence, the only sounds the gentle lapping of the water and the distant drip of condensation. After days of constant tension and movement, the momentary peace felt almost surreal. "Tell me more about this Admiral Corey," Kalen said eventually. "How can you be sure she'll listen to us?" Lyra was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "She has had contact with my people before. Unofficial, diplomatic channels opened without the knowledge of the Terran High Command. She is one of the few high-ranking officials who questions the origins and motivations behind this war. And she has a base on Xylos? How has that remained hidden from both military hierarchies?" "It is less a military installation and more a research outpost," Lyra explained. "Officially designated as an ecological monitoring station. She has gathered scientists, diplomats, and like-minded military personnel from both sides, individuals who suspect the truth about the conflict." The concept of such cooperation, happening secretly while the war raged on, gave Kalen a strange sense of hope. Perhaps they weren't as alone in their mission as he had feared. "Our main challenge will be reaching her facility without being intercepted," Lyra continued. "Both Mercer and the Cygnian commander will have reported our escape. Their superiors, those under the influence of the Shadowed Ones, will commit significant resources to finding us." "How close are we to her base?" "If my calculations are correct, approximately 30 kilometers northeast of our current position. A day's journey through difficult terrain." Kalen nodded, already mentally mapping their route, assessing potential dangers. The soldier in him, always planning, always preparing for the worst. "You should rest while you can," Lyra suggested, noticing his fatigue despite his efforts to hide it. "I will keep watch." "Wake me in 4 hours," Kalen replied, reluctantly leaving the warmth of the pool to find a dry spot against the chamber wall. He arranged his still damp undergarments as best he could for modesty and lay down on the smooth stone floor, his body aching with exhaustion. As he drifted toward sleep, he found himself studying Lyra's profile as she sat by the pool, her silver eyes reflecting the ancient murals, her aquamarine skin gently glowing in the darkness. An alien, he reminded himself, the enemy, according to everything he'd been taught. And yet, in this moment, she seemed more ally, more kindred spirit than many humans he had served alongside. With that unsettling, yet somehow comforting thought, he surrendered to sleep. Kalen awoke to Lyra's hand on his shoulder, her touch light but urgent. He was instantly alert, years of military training overriding the fog of sleep. "Someone is approaching," she whispered, handing him his now-dry clothing. Multiple individuals, moving with purpose. As he dressed quickly, Kalen listened, catching the faint echo of footsteps reverberating through the carved tunnels. How many? At least 6, possibly more. Lyra was already gathering their meager supplies. "There's another exit on the far side of the chamber, behind the murals. A smaller passage that may lead to the surface." They moved swiftly and silently toward the hidden exit, Kalen's hand resting on his sidearm, ready to provide covering fire if needed. The narrow tunnel Lyra had discovered was barely large enough for them to navigate single file, forcing them to crouch as they hurried through the darkness, guided only by Lyra's bioluminescence. The sound of voices echoed behind them, speaking standard Terran, Kalen noted with a grimace. Mercer's team had found them faster than he'd anticipated. The tunnel began to slope upward, becoming steeper and more challenging to climb. The smooth stone gave way to rough, natural rock, suggesting they'd left the ancient structure and entered a natural cave system. After several minutes of difficult ascent, they emerged into early morning light, finding themselves on a rugged hillside overlooking a vast plain. "There," Lyra said, pointing northward toward a distant mountain range. "Admiral Curry's research station is situated in those foothills. If we move quickly, we might reach it by nightfall." Kalen surveyed the open terrain with a tactical eye. "No cover for at least 5 kilometers. We'll be exposed and vulnerable." "We have little choice," Lyra replied. "They are already in the tunnel system behind us. Our head start will not last long." With grim determination, they began their journey across the plain, maintaining a steady pace that balanced speed with the need to conserve energy for what promised to be a grueling day's travel. The twin suns of Xylos rose higher in the sky, their harsh light beating down on the barren landscape. 2 hours into their trek, Kalen spotted a dust cloud on the horizon behind them. "Vehicles," he said grimly. "Ground transport moving fast." Lyra's silver eyes narrowed as she assessed the approaching threat. "We cannot outrun them in open terrain." "No," Kalen agreed, scanning their surroundings desperately for any tactical advantage. About a kilometer ahead, the uniform plain gave way to more broken ground, a series of ravines and rocky outcroppings that might offer some cover. "If we can reach those ravines," he said, pointing, "we might be able to lose them in the maze of channels. The terrain will slow their vehicles, force them to proceed on foot." Without a word, they broke into a run, pushing their tired bodies to their limits. The dust cloud grew larger behind them, the rumble of engines now audible in the still air. It would be close, too close. They were still 300 meters from the ravine's edge when Kalen heard the distinctive whine of a Terran hoverbike accelerating to attack speed. Glancing back, he saw 3 riders detach from the main group, racing ahead to intercept them. "Go," he shouted to Lyra, reaching for a sidearm. "Get to the ravine. I'll hold them off." "No." Lyra's voice was fierce. "We stay together." Before Kalen could argue, she pulled the crystal device from her pocket and pressed it into his hand. "Take this, in case we are separated. It must reach Admiral Curry." The lead hoverbike was less than 100 meters behind them now. Kalen could see the rider raising a pulse rifle, preparing to fire. Making a split-second decision, he pulled Lyra behind a lone boulder. Pitiful cover, but all they had. The first energy bolt struck the rock, sending fragments flying. Kalen returned fire, his handgun woefully outmatched against the military-grade weapons, but accurate enough to force the lead rider to veer off course. "This position is indefensible," he said grimly, squeezing off another shot that narrowly missed the second rider. "We need to make a break for the ravine while they're repositioning." Lyra nodded, her expression determined. "On your signal." The hovercrafts were circling now, preparing for another approach. Kalen waited for the moment when all 3 were momentarily aligned from their position, then fired his remaining shots in quick succession. One found its mark, causing a hoverbike to spin out of control and crash into another. The third rider broke formation to avoid the collision. "Now!" Kalen shouted, grabbing Lyra's hand as they sprinted toward the ravine. They were 50 meters from safety when a new sound cut through the air, the higher-pitched whine of Cygnian anti-gravity units. From the east, a sleek silver craft descended with alarming speed, cutting off their route to the ravine. "Trapped!" Lyra gasped as they skidded to a halt. The Cygnian craft settled to the ground, its boarding ramp extending. Simultaneously, the remaining Terran forces, at least 2 ground vehicles carrying a full squad of soldiers, closed in from the south. "Options?" Kalen asked, knowing the answer even as he spoke. Lyra's silver eyes met his, a complex emotion in their depths. "None that end well for both of us." Lieutenant Mercer's voice boomed through an amplifier from the lead Terran vehicle. "Sergeant Vance, surrender the Cygnian and the data crystal immediately. This is your final warning." From the Cygnian craft, a similarly ultimatum was issued in accented Standard Terran. "Human forces, the female scientist, and the research data belong to the Cygnian Empire. Interference will be considered an act of war. Kalen almost laughed at the absurdity, as if they weren't already at war, as if further provocation was needed. He looked at Lyra, saw the resignation in her expression, and made his decision. "Listen to me," he said urgently, keeping his voice low. "I'm going to create a diversion. When I do, run for the ravine. Get the crystal to Admiral Corey." "They will kill you," Lyra replied, her voice tight. "Maybe." Kalen managed a grim smile. "But better one of us completes the mission than both of us fail." Before she could object further, he straightened and called out, "I'm coming out. I have what you want." "Kalen, no," Lyra began, but he silenced her with a look. "Trust me," he whispered. Then, louder, "I'm surrendering. Hold your fire." With deliberate movements, he stepped away from Lyra, hands raised, drawing all attention to himself. The Terran forces shifted focus, weapons trained on him. Even the Cygnian craft repositioned slightly, its weapons systems tracking his movement. "Lieutenant Mercer," Kalen called. "I have the data crystal. The Cygnian is injured and no threat. Let me approach with the information you want." There was a moment of tense silence, then Mercer's voice. "Advance slowly, Vance. Any sudden moves, and my men will fire." Kalen began walking toward the Terran line, his hands still raised. From the corner of his eye, he saw Lyra still frozen in place, her expression torn between desperation and determination. He was halfway to the Terran vehicles when he implemented his plan. In one smooth motion, he drew his backup weapon, a small pistol hidden at his ankle, and fired at the fuel cells of the nearest hoverbike. The resulting explosion wasn't large, but it was spectacular enough to create momentary chaos. "Run," he shouted to Lyra, diving for cover as pulse fire erupted from both Terran and Cygnian forces. Through the smoke and confusion, he saw her hesitate for just a moment, then turn and sprint toward the ravine. Several soldiers noticed and redirected their fire, but she was fast, unnaturally fast, moving with a liquid grace that defied human limitations. Kalen continued firing, providing what covering fire he could as Lyra disappeared over the edge of the ravine. Only then did he allow himself a moment of relief. She had made it. The mission could continue. His triumph was short-lived. A stun blast from behind sent him sprawling, his muscles seizing as electricity coursed through his body. Through the haze of pain, he saw Lieutenant Mercer standing over him, his face contorted with rage. "You'll pay for that, traitor," Mercer snarled, delivering a vicious kick to Kalen's ribs. "But first, you're going to tell me exactly where she's heading." As darkness claimed him, Kalen's last conscious thought was of Lyra, running through the ravines, carrying the truth that could end the war. He hoped it would be enough. He hoped his sacrifice would matter. Consciousness returned slowly, painfully. Kalen became aware first of the throbbing in his head, then the sharp ache in his ribs where Mercer's boot had connected. He was seated, arms secured behind him, in what appeared to be the cargo hold of a Terran transport. The famous Sergeant Vance, awake at last. The voice was unfamiliar, cultured, almost pleasant, with an accent Kalen couldn't quite place. He blinked, forcing his vision to focus on the figure seated across from him. A slender man in an immaculate gray suit that bore no military insignia or rank identifiers. "Who are you?" Kalen's voice was hoarse, his throat dry from unconsciousness. "Someone interested in your recent activities." The man smiled, the expression never reaching his cold eyes. "Specifically, your interaction with the Cygnian scientist and the data crystal she was carrying." Kalen said nothing, mentally assessing his situation. Besides the stranger, two armed guards stood at the transport's rear door. Through a small window, he could see they were airborne, though he had no way to determine their heading or altitude. "Your silence is understandable, if futile," the stranger continued. "Lieutenant Mercer has provided a detailed report of your treasonous activities. What I'm more interested in is why." He leaned forward slightly. "What did the alien tell you, Sergeant? What lies convinced a decorated soldier to betray his species?" The phrasing sent a chill through Kalen. It echoed Lyra's description of how the Shadowed Ones framed conflicts, always in terms of species loyalty primal fear of the other, us versus them mentality. She told me the truth about the war, Kalen replied carefully. About who's really pulling the strings. Something flickered in the stranger's eyes. Alarm, quickly masked. And you believe these alien fabrications? How disappointing. I expected better judgment from a man of your record. Who are you? Kalen repeated. You're not military command. Intelligence division. The stranger's smile widened fractionally. Let's say I represent interests concerned with maintaining the current strategic balance. The strategic balance being an endless war based on lies. War is the natural state of competition between distinct species, Sergeant. Conflict drives evolution, innovation. It is necessary. The stranger studied him with clinical detachment. Now, shall we dispense with philosophizing? Tell me where the Signian scientist was heading and what exactly was on that crystal. Kalen matched the man's stare. I don't know. She never told me. It was a lie, of course, but delivered with the conviction of truth. Years of resistance training during special operations had taught him how to withstand basic interrogation. The stranger sighed, as if genuinely disappointed. I had hoped to avoid unpleasantness. He made a subtle gesture, and one of the guards stepped forward, producing a small device that Kalen recognized with dread, a neural stimulator designed to amplify pain signals to the brain. This can be extremely uncomfortable, the stranger said conversationally. The sensation has been described as having every nerve ending flayed simultaneously. I understand even the most hardened soldiers rarely withstand it for more than a few minutes. As the guard approached with the device, Kalen tensed, preparing himself for what was to come. But before the neural stimulator could be attached, the transport lurched violently, throwing everyone off balance. Warning klaxons blared, and the pilot's voice came over the intercom. Incoming fire. Evasive maneuvers. The stranger's composed facade cracked, revealing momentary confusion and anger. What is happening? He demanded of the guards. Unknown aircraft, sir, one replied, checking a tactical display, not matching any registered Terran or Signian signatures. Another impact rocked the transport, more severe this time. Emergency lights activated as the main power fluctuated. We're losing altitude, the pilot's voice called. Brace for emergency landing. The next few minutes were chaos, the transport spiraling downward, everyone inside thrown against restraints or bulkheads. Kalen used the distraction to work at his bonds, the plastic restraints cutting into his wrists as he strained against them. The crash, when it came, was surprisingly controlled, a hard landing rather than a catastrophic impact. Still, it was violent enough to snap Kalen's weakened restraints as he was thrown forward, colliding with the stranger who had been interrogating him. Dazed but determined, Kalen scrambled to his feet in the smoke-filled cabin. One guard was unconscious, the other struggling to unholster his weapon with an obviously broken arm. The stranger was slumped against the bulkhead, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. The transport's rear door had been partially dislodged in the crash. Kalen delivered a precise strike to the remaining guard's injured arm, incapacitating him, then kicked at the damaged door until it gave way. Fresh air rushed in, clearing some of the acrid smoke. Outside, he found himself on a rocky plateau. In the distance, he could see the mountain range where Admiral Curry's research station was supposedly located. They'd been flying in that direction, he realized, pursuing Lyra. The sound of approaching aircraft made him duck back into the shelter of the damaged transport. Peering cautiously upward, he saw not the expected Terran rescue ship, but a sleek vessel of unfamiliar design, hovering above the crash site. As he watched, a beam of light extended from the ship to the ground, and within it, a figure materialized, humanoid but clearly not human, with the same aquamarine skin tone as Lyra, though taller and more heavily built. A second figure appeared beside the first, and Kalen's heart leaped. It was Lyra, apparently unharmed, her silver eyes scanning the crash site with obvious concern. Kalen, she called, catching sight of him in the transport doorway. Are you injured? Cautiously, still wary of potential threats, Kalen emerged. I'm all right. What is this? Who? There is no time for explanations. The other Signian interrupted, his voice deep and authoritative. More Terran forces are converging on this location. We must leave immediately. Lyra rushed to Kalen's side, quickly examining his visible injuries. I feared you were dead, she said quietly, when I reached the research station and learned they had captured you. Research station? You made it to Admiral Corey? Hope surged through Kalen. Yes, the data crystal is safe, and the Admiral has already begun contacting her allies in both governments. Lyra took his hand. But we must go now. The Shadowed Ones will stop at nothing to silence us. The male Signian, clearly some kind of officer or official, based on his ornate attire, made an impatient gesture. Sister, we cannot linger. The human comes with us or stays behind. Sister. The word registered dimly in Kalen's mind as he allowed Lyra to lead him toward the light beam. He cast one last glance at the crashed transport, where the stranger in the gray suit was now emerging, his face a mask of cold fury as he watched their escape. Then the beam enveloped them, and the world dissolved into light. The Signian vessel's interior was unlike any spacecraft Kalen had ever seen. Organic curves instead of industrial angles, surfaces that seemed to pulse with a life of their own, lighting that adjusted to their presence. It reminded him more of being inside a living organism than a machine. You must have questions, Lyra said as she guided him to what appeared to be a medical bay, where another Signian was preparing treatment equipment. A few, Kalen replied with dry understatement. Starting with your brother? Tarek is actually my half-brother, Lyra explained, gesturing for him to sit on an examination platform. He commands this vessel, a science and diplomatic ship, not a military craft. When I arrived at Admiral Curry's research station, she immediately contacted him through secure channels. The medical officer, a female Signian with paler skin than Lyra's, approached with what looked like a handheld scanner. She spoke briefly in the liquid syllables of the Signian language, and Lyra translated. She needs to assess your injuries. The procedure is non-invasive. Kalen nodded permission, wincing slightly as the scanner passed over his bruised ribs. The sensation was peculiar, a mild tingling followed by a pleasant warmth as the device seemingly mapped his internal injuries. Where are we heading? He asked while the examination continued. Back to Admiral Curry's research station, Lyra replied. It's the safest place for now. Both the Terran High Command and the Signian Imperial Council are in turmoil as the first pieces of evidence from the data crystal are being disseminated through secure channels. The medical officer spoke again, this time with an air of finality. Lyra nodded, then translated for Kalen. Minor fractures to 2 ribs, moderate concussion, various contusions. Nothing life-threatening, but she recommends treatment. Tell her I appreciate her concern, but I can manage, Kalen said. After years of battlefield injuries, his current condition barely registered as serious. Lyra relayed his response, which earned him an exasperated look from the medical officer. Without waiting for further permission, the Signian woman pressed a device against his side that released a cool mist. Almost immediately, the pain in his ribs subsided. Temporary analgesic and cellular regeneration catalyst, Lyra explained. It will accelerate healing without impairing function. The medical officer departed, leaving them alone in the treatment room. For the first time since their desperate escape across the plains, they had a moment of relative privacy and safety. I thought you were dead, Lyra said quietly, the composure she had maintained slipping slightly. When I saw them take you, I wanted to go back, but you made the right choice, Kalen interrupted. The mission had to come first. The truth had to reach Admiral Corey. Lyra nodded, though the haunted look in her silver eyes suggested the decision had cost her more than she was willing to admit. The Admiral was expecting us. She had been monitoring unusual communication patterns between certain officials in both governments, patterns that matched historical data suggesting Shadowed One's influence. The man who was interrogating me, Kalen said, recalling the stranger's cold eyes and clinical manner. He wasn't regular military. I think he might have been one of them, or at least working directly for them. It's possible. The Shadowed Ones rarely act openly, preferring to work through intermediaries and influenced officials. Lyra hesitated. There's something else you should know about the data crystal and about me. Before she could continue, the door slid open, and Tarek entered, his imposing presence filling the small medical bay. Up close, Kalen could see the family resemblance, the same determined set of the jaw, the same intensity in the silver eyes. "We are approaching the research station," Tarek announced without preamble. "Admiral Khoury wishes to speak with both of you immediately upon arrival." His gaze settled on Kalen, assessment clear in his expression. "So, this is the human who risked everything to help my sister. The Admiral speaks highly of your actions, Sergeant Vance." "Your sister risked just as much," Kalen replied. "More, probably. She's the one who had the courage to seek truth instead of blindly following orders." A flicker of what might have been approval crossed Tarek's features. "Perhaps there is hope for cooperation between our species after all." He turned to Lyra. "The Council has received the first data packets. They are disturbed by the implications. Several members are calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities and direct communication with Terran leadership." "And the opposition?" Lyra asked, tension evident in her voice. Vocal but diminishing. "The evidence is compelling, sister. Even the war faction cannot dismiss it entirely." Tarek's expression darkened. "Though we must remain vigilant. The shadowed ones will not surrender their influence easily." The ship shuddered slightly as it began its descent. Through a viewport, Kalen caught glimpses of rugged mountain terrain, the same range he had seen from the crash site, but from a different angle. Cleverly hidden among the peaks, nearly invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, was what appeared to be a scientific research facility. "Admiral Khoury's station," he murmured. "Yes," Lyra confirmed. "Officially designated Ecological Research Outpost ER-7. Unofficially, the heart of a growing movement for peace." As they prepared for landing, Kalen found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought him here. From a prison cell encounter with an alien prisoner to the center of a movement that might end generations of conflict. All because he had chosen mercy over duty, compassion over blind obedience. And perhaps, he thought as he glanced at Lyra, something more than mercy had guided his decision that day. The research station was a marvel of engineering and discretion, built into the mountain itself, its exterior camouflaged to match the surrounding rock formations. Inside, it was equally impressive, featuring a seamless integration of Terran and Cygnian technologies, staffed by a diverse team from both species working in apparent harmony. Admiral Helena Khoury was not what Kalen had expected. The legendary naval commander was a small woman with close-cropped gray hair and penetrating dark eyes that seemed to evaluate and categorize everything they fell upon. She wore a simple Terran uniform with minimal rank insignia. Practical, understated, yet carrying an undeniable air of authority. "Sergeant Vance," she greeted him as they were led into her office. "I've heard much about your actions, both from your military record and more recently from scientist Lyra." "Admiral," Kalen acknowledged with a respectful nod. Military protocol suggested a salute, but he wasn't certain of his status anymore. Deserter, traitor, or perhaps something else entirely. "Please sit." Khoury gestured to chairs arranged around a circular table. "We have much to discuss and limited time in which to do it." As they settled, Kalen noticed others joining them. A mix of Terran and Cygnian officials, all with the same focused intensity as the Admiral. This was clearly the inner circle of whatever coalition Khoury had built. "Thanks to the data crystal you both risked your lives to deliver, we now have irrefutable evidence of external manipulation in the Terran-Cygnian conflict," Khoury began without preamble. "We've identified key officials on both sides who show signs of shadowed one's influence, and we've begun subtle countermeasures to neutralize that influence." "The response has been encouraging," added a Cygnian official. "Already, military commanders on both sides are questioning orders that previously seemed logical but now appear designed to perpetuate conflict." "However," Khoury continued, her expression grave, "we face a critical problem. The shadowed ones are aware of our actions and are moving to consolidate their control. We've detected unusual communication patterns indicating a coordinated effort to eliminate anyone questioning the war narrative. The man who interrogated me, Kalen interjected. He seemed almost fanatical about maintaining the strategic balance of the war. Likely a direct agent, Curry nodded. The Shadowed Ones maintain a network of fully conscious collaborators in addition to those they merely influence subtly. These agents are the most dangerous, true believers in the doctrine of necessary conflict between species. What's our next move, then? Kalen asked. How do we stop them? A brief silence fell over the gathering. Meaningful glances exchanged between the Admiral and several others. Finally, Curry spoke. The data crystal contained more than just evidence of manipulation, she said carefully. It also included comprehensive research on the genetic compatibility between humans and Signians, research conducted by scientist Lyra and her team over several years. Kalen turned to Lyra, who met his gaze steadily. This is what I was about to tell you on the ship, she said. My primary field isn't general xenobiology, as I implied. I specialize in comparative genetics, specifically the study of potential hybridization between compatible species. And your research confirmed what the Shadowed Ones have apparently always feared, Curry continued. That offspring of human and Signian parentage would possess unique neurological structures, rendering them immune to the Shadowed One's influence, potentially even capable of detecting and counteracting that influence in others. The implications struck Kalen with sudden clarity. So when you said in the cell that your body would give me powerful offspring, I meant it literally, Lyra finished. Though I couldn't tell you the full truth then. The child of our union would represent a direct threat to the Shadowed One's power, the first of a generation that could end their manipulation permanently. Which is why, Admiral Curry said, leaning forward, they have been monitoring Lyra's research team for years, eliminating members when possible, and why they became desperate to capture both of you once they realized the data crystal was in play. Tarek, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. The Shadowed Ones engineered this war specifically to prevent such unions from occurring naturally as our species began to encounter one another in shared space. They recognized the threat before we did. The weight of this revelation settled over Kalen. What had begun as a desperate plea from a prisoner had turned out to be the key to ending not just the current conflict, but potentially all future manipulated wars between compatible species. So what exactly are you proposing? He asked, looking from Curry to Lyra. We believe the existence of even one hybrid child would be powerful both symbolically and practically, the Admiral replied. Symbolic as living proof of peaceful cooperation between our species, practical as the first of a generation with natural immunity to the very influence that has kept us at war. But this isn't just about biology or strategy, Lyra added softly. It would have to be a choice freely made by both of us. Kalen found himself at a loss for words. The clinical, strategic logic of it made sense, but the personal implications were overwhelming. A child, his child, with Lyra. A being who would embody the union of two supposedly incompatible species, living proof of the lies they had all been told. I understand this is a lot to process, Curry said, reading his expression. And we're not asking for an immediate decision. But time is not on our side. The Shadowed Ones are already moving to contain the damage caused by the data crystal's revelations. Reports from our sources indicate purges have begun in both military hierarchies. Another Terran official added grimly. Officers' questioning orders are being relieved of command, replaced with those more susceptible to influence. Tarek nodded. The Empire faces similar challenges. The war faction is rallying, portraying peace advocates as traitors and cowards. We need a symbol, Curry concluded. Something powerful enough to cut through the propaganda and fear. Something to rally both species around the possibility of peace. In the silence that followed, Kalen studied Lyra's face. In the short time they had known each other, they had saved each other's lives repeatedly, shared dangers and revelations that had transformed his understanding of the universe. There was a connection between them that transcended their biological differences, a mutual respect that had gradually evolved into something deeper. "I need time to think," he said finally. "This isn't a decision to be made in the heat of the moment." "Of course," Curry agreed. "But I must emphasize that our window of opportunity is narrowing. The Shadowed Ones are mobilizing their assets in both governments." "One day," Kalen requested. "Give me 1 day to process everything." The Admiral nodded, then rose to her feet, signaling the end of the meeting. "I'll have quarters prepared for you both. We'll reconvene tomorrow." As the others filed out, Lyra remained, her silver eyes searching his face. "I understand if you're angry," she said quietly. "I wasn't entirely truthful about my research or my intentions." "You were trying to survive," Kalen replied, "and you're trying to save both our species from a manipulated war. It's hard to fault your motives." "Even so," she hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. "The choice must be genuine, Kalen. A child conceived as merely a political symbol or strategic asset would be wrong for all concerned." "I agree." He managed a faint smile. "Not exactly how I imagined potential fatherhood." "Nor I motherhood," Lyra admitted, returning his smile with one of her own, a gesture she had adopted from observing humans, Kalen realized. It transformed her alien features into something unexpectedly warming. They were shown to adjacent quarters, comfortable but utilitarian rooms typical of a research facility. Alone for the first time in days, Kalen showered, treated his remaining injuries, and tried to organize his thoughts about the monumental decision before him. It wasn't just about biology or politics, or even the fate of two civilizations. It was intensely personal. A child, his child, with a woman, a being from another world. A being who had shown more courage, compassion, and integrity than most humans he had known. Sleep eluded him. Eventually, he found himself wandering the quiet corridors of the research station, nodding occasionally to the night staff. Humans and Signians working side by side in what seemed like a preview of a possible future. His wanderings led him to an observation deck overlooking the mountain range. The 3 moons of Xylos hung in the night sky, casting multiple shadows across the rugged landscape. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" He turned to find Lyra standing in the doorway, her aquamarine skin glowing faintly in the moonlight. She had changed from her travel-worn clothing into what appeared to be standard Signian attire, a simple tunic and fitted leggings in muted colors. "Yes," he agreed, making room for her at the viewport. "Easy to forget, with everything that's happening, that this planet has its own beauty, independent of our conflicts." "That's what first drew me here," Lyra said, joining him. "The biodiversity, the unique evolutionary paths taken by life forms on Xylos. It was meant to be a purely scientific expedition. Before the war changed everything." "Before the war changed everything," she echoed. "Though perhaps not everything has changed for the worse." Kalen glanced at her, catching her meaning. "We wouldn't have met." "No." Lyra's silver eyes reflected the moonlight as she turned to face him. "And despite everything, the danger, the pain, the uncertainty, I find I cannot regret that part." Something shifted between them in that moment. An acknowledgement of feelings that had been developing since their desperate escape across alien terrain. Without conscious thought, Kalen reached out, his hand covering hers on the viewport ledge. "In my culture," Lyra said softly, "bonding between mates involves a gradual alignment of neural patterns, a literal growing together of minds. It typically takes years of proximity and shared experience." "And in human culture," Kalen replied, "it often starts with something as simple as this." He lifted his free hand to gently touch her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. Lyra leaned into his touch, her eyes half closing. "Your species values physical contact highly." "We do," he murmured, then hesitated. "Is this acceptable to you?" In answer, she moved closer, her hand rising to mirror his gesture, fingers tentatively exploring the contours of his face. "Different," she whispered, "but not unpleasant." What followed was a careful, gentle exploration of differences and similarities. Human lips meeting Signian in a kiss that bridged worlds. hands discovering unfamiliar textures and unexpected points of sensitivity. Words given way to touch, to the universal language of attraction that apparently transcended species. Later, as they lay together in the quiet of Kalen's quarters, Lyra traced patterns on his chest, her touch leaving faint luminescent trails that slowly faded. "Do all Signians glow?" he asked, fascinated by the phenomenon. "Only in certain emotional states," she replied, a hint of what he now recognized as embarrassment in her voice. "It's involuntary." Kalen smiled, finding the reaction endearing. "I like it. It's beautiful. Like bioluminescent sea creatures from Earth." They talked for hours, sharing personal histories, cultural references, the little details that made up their individual lives before the war, before their paths crossed. The more they shared, the more Kalen recognized the fundamental similarities beneath their obvious differences. "I think I've made my decision," he said finally, as the first light of dawn began to filter through the viewport. "About Admiral Corey's proposal." Lyra propped herself up on one elbow, her expression serious. "And I would be honored to father a child with you," Kalen said simply. "Not for political reasons, not as a symbol or a weapon against the shadowed ones, though I recognize those aspects, but because I've come to care for you, Lyra of the Celestial House of Andromeda. Because I believe we could raise a child well, together, whether as a symbol of peace or simply as our child." The luminescence of Lyra's skin intensified, bathing them both in a soft aquamarine glow that revealed the depth of her emotion before she could verbalize it. "I feel the same," she said finally. "The genetic compatibility, the neurological resistance to manipulation. These are scientific facts that make our union strategically valuable. But they are not why I wish to bond with you, Kalen Vance." She placed her hand over his heart, a Signian gesture of deep trust. "We began as enemies, became allies of necessity, then friends through shared struggle. Now, we have the opportunity to become something more. Partners, parents, perhaps the first of many unions between our peoples." The simplicity and sincerity of her words moved him deeply. Kalen covered her hand with his own, sealing their agreement with a gesture. "Let's tell Admiral Corey," he said, "though I suspect she's already guessed our decision." Corey's reaction, when they informed her later that morning, was indeed one of satisfaction rather than surprise. The Admiral seemed to have aged years in the few hours since their last meeting, dark circles under her eyes testifying to a sleepless night managing the escalating crisis. "Intelligence reports confirm what we feared," she told him grimly. "The Shadowed One's agents are consolidating power in both governments. Several of our key allies have been arrested or silenced. We must move quickly." The plan she outlined was bold, perhaps reckless. Lyra and Kalen would make a public announcement, broadcast simultaneously to both Terran and Signian populations through channels the Resistance had secured. They would reveal the truth about the manipulated war, present evidence from the data crystal, and announce their intention to create a family that bridged the species divide. "It's a dangerous gambit," Corey admitted. "You'll both be targeted by every agent the Shadowed Ones can deploy. But if we can reach enough people with the truth, create enough doubt about the necessity of this conflict, it might give us the breathing room needed to identify and neutralize those under influence," Tarek finished. He had joined them for the briefing, his initial skepticism about Kalen apparently replaced by a grudging respect. "There's one more thing," the Admiral added, her expression grave. "Our medical team believes that, given the genetic complexities involved, conception between your species may be challenging through conventional means." Lyra nodded. "My research indicated as much. There are compatibility issues at the cellular level that might prevent natural fertilization. Dr. Elaine Chun, our chief xenogeneticist, has developed a procedure to address these issues," Corey continued. "With your consent, she would like to begin preparations immediately. The process involves genetic sampling from both of you, followed by laboratory facilitation of the conception process." Kalen exchanged a glance with Lyra. "How long would this procedure take?" "Approximately 3 days for the preliminary work," Corey replied. "Then, if successful, The embryo would be implanted in Lyra. From that point, the pregnancy would progress naturally, though under careful medical supervision. It seemed surreal to be discussing such intimate matters in what amounted to a war council. But Kaylin understood the urgency. If they waited until the conflict was resolved through conventional means, they might be waiting forever, or worse, there might be no one left to wait. "We consent," Lyra said firmly, after another silent exchange with Kaylin. "Let Dr. Chun begin her work." The days that followed were a blur of activity. While the medical team worked with their genetic material, Kaylin and Lyra prepared for their public announcement, working with communications specialists to craft a message that would resonate with both human and Signian sensibilities. They recorded their statement in the research station's broadcast center, a simple, direct address explaining the evidence of manipulation, the possibility of peace, and their own personal commitment to bridging the divide between their peoples. "We stand before you not as enemies, not as representatives of opposing forces, but as two individuals who have discovered a fundamental truth," Kaylin stated, looking directly into the camera. "The war between humans and Signians is based on deliberate deception. It serves neither of our species, only a third party that thrives on our conflict. We have walked both worlds," Lyra continued. "We have seen the suffering on both sides. And we have discovered that what unites us is stronger than what divides us." Together, they announced their intention to create a family, a symbolic and literal union of two supposedly incompatible species. The first of what they hoped would be many such bridges between their peoples. As final preparations for the broadcast were being made, Dr. Chun delivered unexpected news. The genetic integration had been more successful than anticipated, with a viable embryo ready for implantation ahead of schedule. "It's almost as if your genetic patterns were complementary somehow," the doctor explained, her excitement evident despite her professional demeanor. "We expected significant challenges, but your DNA seemed to recognize each other, for lack of a better term." The procedure itself was brief and, according to Lyra, relatively painless. Within hours, new life had begun its journey, a unique being, the first of its kind, carrying genetic material from two worlds. The timing could not have been more critical. Intelligence reports indicated that both the Terran High Command and the Signian Imperial Council were planning major military operations, potentially including planet killers and other weapons of mass destruction. The Shadowed Ones, sensing their control slipping, were apparently pushing for a decisive end to the conflict, one that would eliminate the possibility of reconciliation. "We broadcast in 6 hours," Admiral Corey informed them during a final briefing. "All resistance cells are on standby to capitalize on any positive response. Medical monitors confirm the embryo is stable and developing normally, though it's still very early." "And if the response is negative?" Kaylin asked, voicing the concern they had all been avoiding. "Then we implement evacuation protocol," Corey replied grimly. "This facility has escape vessels prepared. We have contingency locations established in neutral space." Lyra's hand found Kaylin's under the table, their fingers intertwining. Whatever happened, they would face it together, along with the new life they had created. The hours leading up to the broadcast were tense. Security alerts indicated increased military activity around the planet, with both Terran and Signian forces deploying to strategic positions. Whether they were preparing to strike at each other or to converge on the research station remained unclear. 30 minutes before the scheduled transmission, alarm klaxons sounded throughout the facility. "Incoming aircraft," a technician called out. "Multiple signatures, approaching from the north." "Identification," Corey demanded, rushing to the command center. "Mixed force, both Terran and Signian vessels," came the reply. "They're flying in formation, not engaging each other." Kaylin and Lyra exchanged glances of confusion. Enemy forces cooperating? It made no sense unless... "They're both under Shadowed One's influence," Tarek suggested, arriving at the same conclusion. "Working together to prevent our broadcast." "Defensive systems online," another technician reported. but were not equipped to repel a coordinated assault of this magnitude. Curry's face was grim but determined. Begin the broadcast now. Get the message out before they can stop us. The communications team scrambled to comply, initiating the transmission sequence ahead of schedule. On monitors throughout the command center, they could see their recorded message being uplinked to the Resistance's network of relay stations scattered across contested space. Enemy forces on approach, the security officer announced. Estimated time to weapons range, 3 minutes. Broadcast at 20% distribution, the communications chief reported. Signal reaching major population centers in both territories. Outside, the sound of approaching engines grew louder. Through the command center's viewport, they could see the first wave of attack vessels. Sleek Cygnian fighters flanked by heavier Terran bombers, all converging on the research station with clear hostile intent. 50% distribution, the communications officer called out. Signal encountering interference, but holding. The first impact shook the facility, protective shields absorbing the initial bombardment, but visibly weakening under the assault. Warning lights flashed across control panels as systems began to fail. Secondary shields failing, the security officer reported. Primary holding at 60% capacity. Broadcast at 75% distribution, came the update from communications. Major networks beginning to pick up the signal. Another series of impacts rocked the station. Structural alarms began to sound as the mountain itself shuddered under the concentrated firepower. "We need to evacuate," Tarek insisted, already moving toward the emergency escape route. "The broadcast is out. Staying here accomplishes nothing except our deaths." Curry hesitated, clearly torn between standing her ground and saving her people. Evacuation protocol initiated, she finally ordered. "All personnel to emergency. Transpo. Priority for medical staff and our guests." As the command center staff hurried to comply, Kalen pulled Lyra close, his expression intense. "Stay with Dr. Chun," he urged. "Protect our child. I'll help coordinate the evacuation." "We stay together," Lyra countered firmly. "I won't be separated from you again." Before Kalen could argue, the entire facility lurched violently. Support beams groaned, and sections of ceiling began to collapse. Through the deteriorating structure, they could see the attack force had landed on the plateau outside, troops disembarking with weapons drawn. Final containment breach in approximately 2 minutes, the facility's automated system announced with eerie calm. Complete structural failure imminent. "This way," Tarek shouted, gesturing toward an emergency shaft that led to the hidden hangar where escape vessels waited. "The tunnel will hold long enough for us to reach the ships." As they rushed through the collapsing research station, Kalen couldn't help but wonder if their efforts had been in vain. The broadcast had gone out, but would it reach enough people? Would it change enough minds before the shadowed ones could reassert control? The hangar was chaos. Personnel scrambling to board the limited number of escape crafts. Medical staff prioritizing the wounded. Security forces establishing a defensive perimeter at the entrance. "Take this vessel," Corey ordered, directing Kalen, Lyra, and Dr. Chun toward a small but swift courier ship. "It's programmed with coordinates to a sanctuary world beyond shadowed one's influence. Tarek will accompany you as pilot." "What about you, Admiral?" Kalen asked, recognizing the look of someone preparing to stay behind. "I'll follow with the second wave," she replied, though her expression suggested otherwise. "Someone needs to ensure everyone gets out." Before they could protest, a massive explosion rocked the hangar. The defensive perimeter had been breached. Through the smoke and debris, they could see figures advancing, a mixed force of Terran and Cygnian troops, moving with the coordinated precision that suggested direct, shadowed one's control. "Go! Now!" Corey commanded, drawing her sidearm and moving toward the front line. Tarek practically shoved them into the courier's ship, sealing the hatch behind them and rushing to the controls. The engines whined to life as he initiated the emergency launch sequence. Through the viewport, they caught a final glimpse of Admiral Corey, standing with a handful of security personnel, covering the escape of the remaining staff, her face set with grim determination as she fired into the advancing enemy forces. Then they were airborne, the small vessel rocketing through an opening in the hangar roof, just as the structure began to collapse entirely. Anti-aircraft fire followed them, energy bolts streaking past the ship as Tarek executed evasive maneuvers that pressed them all into their seats. Atmospheric breach in 30 seconds, he announced tensely. If we can reach orbit, we have a chance. Dr. Chun was monitoring Lyra's condition, concern evident in her expression. The stress and G-forces aren't ideal, she murmured, but the embryo appears stable for now. Kalen held Lyra's hand tightly as their ship punched through Xylos' atmosphere, leaving the beleaguered planet behind. On the communications display, scattered reports were coming in. The broadcast had reached its targets, was being shared across both civilizations despite attempts to censor it. There, Tarek said suddenly, pointing to a data stream. Look at those military communications. Multiple ship captains questioning orders. Some outright refusing to engage. It was happening, exactly what they had hoped for. The truth was spreading, creating doubt, forcing people on both sides to question the conflict that had defined their lives for so long. It's working, Lyra whispered, her free hand resting protectively over her abdomen, where new life was just beginning to take hold. They're listening, as their ship prepared to jump to hyperspace. Leaving the contested system behind, Kalen allowed himself a moment of cautious hope. The war wasn't over. The shadowed ones wouldn't surrender their influence easily. There would be resistance, violence, desperate attempts to maintain the status quo. But something fundamental had changed. A crack had formed in the foundation of hatred and fear that had supported the conflict. A door had been opened to another possibility, one where humans and Signians recognized their common ancestry, their shared future. And in Lyra's womb, that future was already taking shape, a child of two worlds, immune to the manipulations that had kept those worlds apart for so long. Where do we go from here? Lyra asked softly as the stars outside the viewport stretched into lines, marking their transition to faster-than-light travel. Forward, Kalen replied, placing his hand over hers. Together, 3 months later, on a sanctuary world known only to a select few, Kalen stood on the balcony of their temporary home, watching the binary sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. Behind him, he could hear Lyra's voice as she participated in a secure communication with resistance leaders from both species. The situation in known space had evolved rapidly since their escape from Xylos. The broadcast had indeed proven to be the catalyst they had hoped for, triggering widespread questioning of the war's legitimacy. Military defections had followed, then diplomatic overtures, then the first tentative peace talks. The shadowed ones had not surrendered easily. There had been assassinations, false flag operations, desperate attempts to reignite hostilities. Several resistance cells had been discovered and eliminated. Admiral Corey was presumed dead, though her body had never been recovered from the ruins of the research station. But the momentum toward peace had proven unstoppable. Too many people had seen the truth, had recognized the manipulation for what it was, and reports of other interspecies couples following their example. Humans and Signians finding common ground, forming bonds despite generations of conditioned hatred, continued to spread. Lyra joined him on the balcony, her pregnancy now visible as a gentle swelling beneath her tunic. According to Dr. Chun, who had remained with them as their personal physician, the hybrid child was developing normally, showing stable integration of both genetic lineages. Good news from the diplomatic corps, Lyra reported, slipping her arm around his waist. The formal peace treaty will be signed next month. There are still details to work out, reparations to discuss, but the official cessation of hostilities is guaranteed. And the shadowed ones? Kalen asked, his arm automatically encircling her shoulders. Still active, but increasingly isolated. Their agents are being identified and contained. Without the war to focus on, both our peoples are dedicating more resources to understanding and countering their influence. She smiled up at him. Your former lieutenant, Mercer, was one of those recently apprehended. Under examination, they found clear evidence of neural tampering, classic shadowed one's manipulation. Kalen nodded, unsurprised. He had suspected as much from Mercer's fanatical adherence to the war narrative, his disproportionate rage at any questioning of orders. "And us?" he asked, his hand moving to the curve of her belly. "When can we stop hiding?" "Soon," Lyra promised. "The Coalition leadership believes it will be safe for us to make a public appearance once the treaty is signed. By then, the protection protocols will be in place, and our child will have symbolic as well as practical importance." The child stirred beneath his touch, a flutter of movement that still amazed him each time he felt it. Their son, medical scans had confirmed the gender, was active and strong, his unique physiology displaying the best aspects of both genetic lineages. "Have you thought more about names?" Lyra asked, covering his hand with hers. "I was thinking perhaps Adrian," Kalen suggested. "It means Dark One in an ancient Earth language, which seems fitting given what our child represents to the Shadowed Ones." "Adrian," Lyra repeated, testing the sound. In Signian naming tradition, children often carry an element from both family lines. "Perhaps Adrian Tarek Vance." "Perfect," Kalen agreed, smiling at the blend of human and Signian nomenclature. Just as their son would be a perfect blend of their species. Living proof that what had been portrayed as unbridgeable differences were, in fact, complementary strengths. As the final rays of the binary suns slipped below the horizon, Kalen reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate plea in a prison cell, "Show mercy, human, my body will give you powerful offspring," to the cusp of a new era of interspecies cooperation. Lyra had been right, though neither of them could have imagined the full truth behind her words that day. The offspring of their union was indeed powerful, not just as a symbol, but as the first of a generation that would be naturally immune to the manipulations that had kept their peoples at war for so long. "What are you thinking about?" Lyra asked, noting his contemplative expression. "About mercy," Kalen replied honestly. "How a single act of compassion can change everything." Lyra smiled, her silver eyes reflecting the emerging stars. "In my language, the word for mercy and the word for hope share the same root. Perhaps there is wisdom in that connection." As darkness settled over their sanctuary world, they remained on the balcony, two figures from different worlds standing as one, their child, the future, growing stronger between them. The war that had brought them together was ending, but their journey was just beginning. And somewhere in the vast cosmos, the Shadowed Ones were learning a lesson long overdue. That love, when given the chance, would always prove stronger than hate. That connection would always triumph over division. That mercy, extended in a moment of crisis, could indeed change the course of worlds.